This is, in a sense, a transnational presentation because actually it originates from a presentation which I'm going to conclude in Haifa about a debate of 1913. So in any case, my observations are basically conceived as footnotes to the issues which we have been discussing. I imagine, and also more crucially, I would like to encourage a shift from a normative kind of approach to the issue to a more historically oriented one, as already my colleagues have done. You know, of course, that at least I hope well, everybody knows, of course, the joke about the earthquake in Chile. Is it a good thing or is it a bad thing for Jews? Which in itself says something. But what I'm referring to, of course, is a well-known essay by Ezra Mendelssohn in 1984, which discussed the issue whether interwar Poland was good or bad for the Jews. If you haven't read it, you should. My points, my paper is organized in the following points. One, concerning terminology. Second, what I call the roads to NTA. Third, the cautionary tales, some cautionary tales. And lastly, the final assessment whether NTA is good for the Jews. As far as terminology is concerned, I was of course pleased to hear all the critiques of the concept of nation states and the use of the term nation states, which is fine. But I didn't hear any discussion of the use of the term nation. So it would seem that all terms are equal, but some are more equal than others. And incidentally, the term nation state was certainly codified by Meinecke in his famous book. I'm not too sure that it was used much in the 19th century. I've checked with my Italian specialists of 19th century Risorgimento literature, and the term actually doesn't seem to appear. So I think it's important also to keep in mind that the term, if not the idea of nation state, actually comes relatively late. And more to the point, the reasons for my reservations about the lack of discussion of the term nation is that, you know, as all of you know in your different languages, narod, narodnost are all expressions which have very specific and very different meanings depending on the place and the time. Saying this in former Yugoslavia, I think I'm saying something fairly obvious. And as I'm sure many of you know, Gerald Sturz has discussed more than once the very precise use of terminology. Incidentally, the way in which the Americans, just for a change, imposed the use of certain terms in the discussions and the actual ratification of the peace treaties. In particular, I would refer to the term Volksstämme, forgive my pronunciation, which, as you know, was relevant and used in Austrian legislation. I'm saying in the Habsburg period, and I could give some examples from in the Hungarian context. And if you allow me also to mention, for example, the expression autochthonous, which has not been used, but others have been used. I don't feel very much at ease with it. For example, settlers who settled in land which was requisitioned in the 1920s. Are they autochthonous or aren't they? I'm referring, of course, to the colonization of South Serbia. And of course, I could make lots of other examples. For that matter, even the concept of state, many early modern historians would argue that before the French Revolution, many parts of Europe would not have anything which could be identified as a state in the modern sense, let alone the Weberian idealization. So that's one point. Second point, what I would call the roads to NTA, and I just would like to make the very banal point that, of course, NTA, and in particular Renner's formulation, of course, was also inspired by the way in which different religious groups could be represented at certain times. But I would say more broadly, if we leave a second the specific formulation by Renner, in a way it's the historical background to it, and that for me as a historian is perhaps more relevant than the specifics of Renner's formulation, is that in a way we had different models of what was afterwards called national autonomy. The classic case is, of course, the Ottoman model, and as we all know, there is enormous discussions of what exactly was the millet system and what the milletler, etc. were. Now, I'm not saying that this is Renner. I'm just saying something different. I'm saying it's part of a broad spectrum of historical experiences. I'm not qualified to discuss the Russian model, and I mean Russian Tsarist model, but as you all know, there is a lot of work which has now been done on the what we call now the nationality issue in Tsarist Russia. And from my preliminary discussions with my specialists on the topics, I think again, the simplifications of the past over, Russian Tsarist policy as just being Russification and Russification, I think have been long abandoned by specialists. The Austro-Hungarian model, of course, is the one which has been discussed most, not least after the Second World War by Robert Kahn, who probably was reluctant to explain how much he actually was picking up from the Austro-Marxists. But in any case, as we know, the Austrian Cisleithania was composed of a whole series of provinces, and all these provinces had very different realities. Now, very briefly, just let me put as a footnote, as I'm sure many of you know, the idea of autonomy was introduced at the Brunn Conference, I'm saying in the Austrian party, by a Slovene, Kristan. And I'm sure we can find also other predecessors. But what is interesting for me is the fact that Kristan was Slovene. So in other words, we don't have to always assume that the model is necessarily the issue of Jewish autonomy, but we can see it as a general problem throughout the monarchy. Of course, when we were talking about minorities, I'm very skeptical that we actually use that term in the literature of the time. Minorities is a post-World War I expression. Religious minorities, yes, at least in reference to the Ottoman Empire, but I'm very skeptical that we would find national minorities used, but I'm very happy to be proven wrong. But the second point I wanted to add to it is, in the general picture of national groups which begin to feel the need for some kind of political representation and cultural defense, of course you actually have the Germans. In this sense, it's not an accident that Renner was a German, in the sense of Austro-German. Any German worth his salt at the time, before the First World War, could see the writing on the wall. I don't see anything wrong in the idea that also on part of a German there should be a sensitivity to this issue. And a last point, just to illustrate how broad the perspective is that we, again, when we talk about the collapse of empires after the First World War, we sometimes forget that the United Kingdom actually went to pieces after the First World War, during the First World War, with the Irish Civil War. And in a sense, Home Rule was an attempt to face this problem. Now, of course, we all know Home Rule didn't work out, and there was a civil war, and we don't have to go into that. But the whole debate over Home Rule, which I think Eugenio Biagini has studied quite well, I think can provide some elements. Now, how many minutes would you give me still? Any?
4 minutes.
Fine. Then I've just 2 last points, which satisfies at least part of my conscience. In relation to the issue of, is NTA a good thing for Jews or bad things? Well, I may have missed it during the discussions, but I really tried to follow the absence of Gerald Sturz, who has provided some crucial, seminal studies of how issues of national autonomy actually worked in the late Habsburg Empire. Now, I know for some of you it's completely, this is all well known, but I'm sure that, for a great majority of you, these are also well known. But then I'm saying, how is it possible that we discuss these things and then we never bring in issues like the Moravian Compromise, where Sturz has illustrated the way in which, and I won't go into the details, in which the Moravian Compromise introduces extremely laden categories which lead to racialization and the subsequent use of this term. He also illustrated the way in which Austrian legislation after First World War introduced elements of racialization, and he also illustrated, together with others, the nature of the Bukovina Compromise. Now, you'll say, well, what is this? So there's also even an Istrian compromise if you really want to go. Now, you can say, well, what has this got to do with it, with NTA? Well, models, programs have to be fitted in historical realities. And we can of course say that the contemporaries at the time were too stupid to understand the Rennes plan, or we can actually try and see why it had the limited success it did, regardless of the fact that I'm in great sympathy with, of course, with Rennes model, but also to see how these things would be translated in a concrete way, how you would translate an agreement of this kind in terms of the electoral register. And on that, I'll leave you.